Hey, it's Squidly. If you've ever had a problem with other hikers trying to avoid you or steer clear of you, then you probably need to pay attention to these 7 tips for good hiker etiquette. Number 1 is staying on marked trails. That means even when the trails are wet and muddy, because I think our first impulse is when a trail is muddy to sort of skirt around it and try to avoid getting our feet muddy and walking through the mud. But the truth is that the mud usually is not that deep, and by going around the mud, we widen the trail and we sort of extend it and create additional trails, which just impacts the ecosystem and widens our impact on the trail itself. The second one is to yield appropriately. And as I say this, I'm going to be really careful here not to suggest that there's an always right way to do it and an always wrong way to do it. But generally speaking, downhill hikers should yield to the uphill hikers, because the uphill hikers, if they've sort of developed a kind of a cadence or a rhythm to their hiking and they're kind of in the zone, you don't want to interrupt that, because the worst thing in the world when you're an uphill hiker is to kind of have that and somebody interrupts you, you stop, or you sort of break your rhythm and you sort of lose it there, and regaining that can be tough. In addition, generally speaking, mountain bikers and horseback riders should yield to hikers, but that's not always the case. A lot of times the mountain bikers, they're going so fast that it's just impossible for them to stop in time to avoid a hiker. And so it's kind of on hikers to sort of pay attention and watch for mountain bikers, if for no other reason than just to keep from getting run over. The same general rule applies to horseback riders, except that horses are not like bicycles. Bicycles are entirely controlled by the rider. Horses are animals with their own thoughts and brain and fears and things that can kind of scare them and spook them. And so even though the horseback rider should yield, it's kind of on the hiker to be aware of the horseback rider. Maybe step to the side, let the horse go past, talk in kind of a low tone. That way the horse is aware that you're there and that you don't spook it. Not speaking from personal experience, but I don't think I would want to get kicked or trampled by a spooked horse. They're kind of big. Tip number 3 is respecting wildlife. And I would sort of boil this down to really 2 sub-tips in this big tip. And the first one is observe them from a distance. Don't try to get too close and get too familiar with the wildlife, because a couple of things can happen. One, you can spook the wildlife and cause them to act in unnatural ways. And you can also, if it's the wrong kind of wildlife, you can get so close that you provoke them into an attack, not out of aggression on their part, but just out of self-preservation. They're just defending themselves. The second part of this about respecting wildlife is to not feed the wildlife. And there are 2 ways we can go about that, where we're actively feeding them, actively giving them food. That's a terrible thing to do, because it habituates the animals to human food, and they start equating people with food. They become aggressive. They want our food, and they're going to either get it because we give it to them, or they're going to take it away from us, and they become aggressive. The other way that happens is by not protecting the food that we carry with us, either at night where we hang our food to protect it from the animals, or even during the day where we stop and take a break and maybe walk away from our pack, but we've left that food there and we've left it available to animals to get into. Number 4 is practicing leave no trace. And even though there's been a whole video series on this, ask me how I know, but I'm not going to go into all that here. I'll just boil it down really to 2 things. The first part of that is packing out all your trash. If you pack it in, pack it out. And the second part is make a conscious effort to leave no evidence that you were ever there. And basically, if you can do those two things, you're essentially following leave no trace. Number 5 is keeping noise down. And what that looks like is traveling in smaller groups, keeping your conversations down to a lower level decibel, not screaming to each other up and down trail. And thirdly is music. Listen to your music through your headphones, your earbuds, or whatever, but not have an external speaker as you're going up and down trail. And when you are in camp, if you're with a small group that's in camp and it's only you, yeah, having a little bit of music in camp would be fine as long as it's kept at a low level. But being in camp with other people and blasting your music, not everybody wants to hear what you are playing. Basically, with the noise level, what it comes down to is respecting other hikers and respecting wildlife. Number 6 is controlling your pets. Now look, I'm a dog person, love dogs. Dogs, those are my boys. I love them. And even though I like dogs, I don't necessarily want to be mauled by them on trail. So if you have your dog with you and that dog is under really good voice control or on a leash, that's fine. But for your dog to be off leash and not under voice control, that can be a problem, because with me, for example, I really like dogs. I don't mind if a dog comes up to me and I pet the dog and the dog's friendly and it's all good. But if the dog comes up to me and perceives me as a threat and now is going to be aggressive, well, yeah, that's a problem. Or there are some people who are not like me. They don't really like dogs. They're scared of dogs. Dogs bother them. And so when the dog comes up to them, that person is really nervous, which makes the dog nervous, and it creates sometimes kind of a conflict. Number 7 is to respect other hikers. And what that looks like is just being polite to other hikers on trail. And when you're about to pass other hikers, do that politely. Make them aware that you're behind them, and then just ask, hey, can I get past you? Can I pass you here on trail? And I don't think I've ever had an encounter with other hikers that I was passing. Let's just be honest, that doesn't happen very often. That they didn't stop and say, oh yeah, go ahead, and they step off to the side of the trail and let me go. What it comes down to really is just be polite. Number 8 is following specific trail regulations. Some trails and some states and some parks or national forests have very specific rules that they've put in place for very specific reasons. Maybe it has to do with the wildlife or the plant life there, and they have rules in place to try to protect that life so that it's not completely trampled or negatively impacted by the hikers that are on trail. These regulations also prevent overuse. So observing these regulations and abiding by them, just follow the rules, keeps that overuse from taking place and keeps places that are on the edge of being overused from being kind of cut off from us entirely. And finally, number 9 is practicing good hygiene. And that looks like 2 different things. One, following leave no trace guidelines for taking care of and disposing of your human waste. And the second one is not washing in water sources. Now, that can be either washing yourself, your hands, your body, your clothes, or it can be washing your utensils and your cook pot and all of that. You don't want to wash that in the water source. The point is, you don't want that in the water source because the next people coming behind you are anticipating having to be able to drink out of that water source. Okay, so those are 9 tips for good backpacking etiquette, and I know for a fact that I didn't name everything. So in the comments, tell me what I missed. Tell me what I got wrong. Be nice about it. But let's have that conversation in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.